So this paper and its implications are kind of going viral online. It's called Superintelligence Strategy. And the authors of this paper are some big names in the AI space. We have Dan Hendricks, Eric Schmidt, and Alexander Wang. Eric Schmidt may be the most well-known one, so he's the ex-CEO of Google and is well known for kind of his ability to predict the tech future, kind of knowing, understanding, projecting where tech will take us. We have Alexander Wang, CEO of Scale AI, and we have Dan Hendricks, so he's the director of the Center for AI Safety. Looks like he's listed as one of the sort of advisors for both xAI, Elon Musk's AI company, and Scale AI. That's Alexander's company. Also, the California AI bill that did not pass but was proposed, SB 1047. Dan was in some ways sort of related to that, a proponent of the bill. And kind of the big point to understand here is that now more and more big names in the AI space are more or less saying the same thing. Leopold Aschenbrenner in his situational awareness paper was talking about kind of superintelligence, the development of super intelligent AI, or I guess a better way of saying that is artificial superintelligence, would be like the Manhattan Project was back in the days for the development of the nuclear bomb. It would involve state actors. It would be a competition, a race between the different states. And we're seeing a similar dynamic here. Multiple nations are wanting to lead in this new sort of AI revolution. Now, Dario Amodei and Demis Hassabis, both in blog posts or interviews, have said similar things, maybe not in quite the same words, but most people right now are signaling that it's very important that superintelligence is developed in a democratic country. Basically, to kind of cut to the chase, we're talking about US and allies versus China and allies. The belief here is that one nation reaching superintelligence could potentially become the dominant nation permanently. In a recent interview, Dario Amodei was saying how if, for example, US and China are competing neck to neck, so kind of in an even race, that is a very dangerous condition. However, he believes that if US pulls ahead, that might be safer because that will give us more time to think through various safety guardrails, working through AI safety, etc. I think that's a fair representation of what he was talking about. And again, this is kind of a shift that's happening right now rather rapidly, and a lot of the big players are getting behind this, right? So Google DeepMind, Demis Hassabis, is removing some of the language that's sort of prohibiting the use of AI for weapons, for military use. Here's the blog post that outlines his views if you wanted to cover it. They're, of course, a little bit more subtle in how they phrase things, but here's the sentence that I think kind of demonstrates what they're talking about. We believe democracies should lead in AI development guided by core values like freedom, equality, and respect for human rights. He's also saying that there's a global competition for AI leadership within an increasingly complex geopolitical landscape. That, I feel, is more or less saying US needs to win ahead of China. That's how I'm interpreting it. This is how I think most people would interpret it. Here's Dario Amodei's his post on DeepSeek, the Chinese open source AI, and export controls. Here's one sentence from my blog post. Even if US and China were at parity, they were equal in their AI systems capabilities, it seems likely that China could direct more talent, capital, and focus to military applications of the technology. This would mean China would take the commanding lead on a global stage, not just for AI, but for everything. Coming back to our paper, the Superintelligence Strategy, it begins by saying that destabilizing AI developments could rupture the balance of power and raise the odds of great power conflict. So again, big point here is that some of the best and brightest minds of AI, the ones that kind of see first and foremost where everything's heading, the ones that have the front row seats towards like the development of AI, a lot of them are saying kind of the same thing. Basically, that there's a race between two sort of superpowers that are trying to take the lead in AI development, and the stakes are extremely, extremely high. So superintelligence, AI vastly better than humans at nearly all cognitive tasks, is now anticipated by AI researchers. So assume superintelligence is coming. And just like in the past, we developed nuclear strategies to secure our survival, we now need similar strategies to secure our survival in this new age of superintelligence. So if you recall, there was a deterrence regime called MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction. Well, now they introduce a similar sort of strategy. They call it Mutual Assured AI Malfunction, or MAME. which I gotta say is quite an acronym. It's pretty good. And the point of it is that if any state has sort of an aggressive bid for unilateral AI dominance, it would be met with preventative sabotage by rivals. So, for example, if nation A decides to kind of try to control AI with no sort of counterbalance, that they're trying to create a sort of a monopoly on AI, if you will, a dominant lead, that will be met with sort of sabotage by rivals. All the rivals would try to prevent this from happening, doing all sorts of things, including, kinetic strikes on the data centers, like bomb the data centers, and various other covert things to try to sabotage the AI or the researchers or anything to do with the development of these technologies. States can also make sure that this technology doesn't get to rogue actors, right? People that would abuse this for potentially great evil. And of course, this tech would really increase the competitiveness of the nations through improving the economy, militaries, etc. So they propose a three-pronged strategy: deterrence, competitiveness, and non-proliferation. So deterrence is detect and deter destabilizing AI projects with cyber espionage and sabotage. I assume they meant sabotage. Maybe it's a new word, sabotage. By the way, as I'm reading this, I just realized OpenAI also had something extremely similar, their sort of economic proposal for the White House and how to do a lot of these things. So OpenAI has something very similar to this as well. So that's another big player that is talking about a lot of the same things. Again, overwhelmingly, all the leaders are signaling their support for something like this, right? They might have different details about it, but sort of the broad strokes, they're all the same. They briefly mention a lot of the risks that AI and superintelligence pose, including bioweapons, never before seen military attacks, various super weapons, potentially ones we haven't even conceived of yet. And the parallel they draw, they're saying that a nation with the sole possession of superintelligence might be as overwhelming as the conquistadors were to the Aztecs. And again, we see this idea of an intelligence explosion. I think Leopold Aschenbrenner put it really well by saying that AI doesn't need to automate everything. It just really, at the end of the day, needs to automate just one thing. And that thing is AI research. If we get to the point where AI conducts AI research and development better than humans can, which potentially isn't that far away, that's sort of like compounding growth that kicks off a intelligence explosion. Racing countries might forego human oversight of automated research, since it would slow research from machine speed to human speed. Also, the other big trend we're seeing now is, for example, with large language models and training them with reinforcement learning, RL, so relying less on human data and supervised fine-tuning, for example. DeepSeek published their DeepSeek R10, kind of around that idea. It seems very powerful. It seems capable of making very sort of adaptive AIs that come up with their own kind of novel ways to solve problems. Google DeepMind published a lot of papers on this, of course, including ones that says supervised fine-tuning, so kind of like using human data in examples, that leads to memorization. Reinforcement learning leads to generalization. And there's more and more talk about this subject right now. We've covered multiple papers that are showing that this kind of might be like the next big breakthrough. Of course, the reasoning models that we've been seeing are in part kind of emerging out of that idea, out of that technology. Is basically taking large language models and using RL to sort of take them to the next level. And that approach can potentially create superhuman level AIs. We've seen superhuman AI that was narrow, for example, AlphaGo, and after that, AlphaGo 0. And one of the terminologies that you might keep hearing more and more moving forward is this idea of Move 37. This is where AlphaGo did something that was considered creative and unique. At the time, it almost seemed like it made a mistake. All the experts watching the game was like, oh, it made an error. That's a bad move. They looked at it and sort of intuitively thought it was a bad move. Only later do we understand how foundational that move was for AlphaGo finally, finishing and winning the game. So Move 37 used to refer kind of to that game of AlphaGo versus Lee Sedol, where this AI beat the world champion at Go. But now more and more broadly, it seems to refer to this idea of specifically AIs trained with reinforcement learning with RL, coming up with things that seem alien to us, right? Strategies and concepts that sort of human ingenuity and human brains don't by default come up with. However, those sort of new, novel, alien strategies are brilliant, are highly effective. So the fear here is that automated AI research can potentially be faster, create more progress, at the expense of transparency, right? Our ability to sort of interpret what's happening within these neural nets. As they say here, if AI systems outpace the safeguards designed for them, we may accidentally unleash an AI that does not follow a commander's intent. So really fast, they outline some of these sort of existing strategies. For example, the hands-off approach, right? So move fast and break things, or the YOLO strategy, you only live once. This, of course, could lead to catastrophic misuse. Then we have the moratorium strategy. So this is kind of like the idea of everybody pausing either now or at some point in the future when there's a certain threshold that is reached. The issue is that within a country, we're able to regulate for something like that. A government can sort of set rules and enforce them. On the international stage, there's not really an enforcer. So if a country figures out some potentially dangerous ability, but that gives them a massive advantage, they may not choose to pause. They might choose to press their advantage, right? As they say here, militaries desire precisely these hazardous capabilities, right? So if you're thinking of it in terms of weapons, you do want to develop the most dangerous thing possible and hope that, it only goes against your opponent. And this is where we could really run into trouble. And of course, the monopoly strategy. So the idea that one nation could try to develop a monopoly, like AI supremacy of some sort. But this could very well trigger a global conflict. Then MAME is the default regime. So this idea that various state security apparatus, right, the intelligence agencies will likely sabotage dangerous AI projects, right? So China will try to sabotage, undermine any U.S. project if it gets too powerful, too out of hand to maintain control. This could be done with covert espionage, sabotage, or including military action like kinetic strikes, etc. And not only could these strikes be against data centers, right? So kind of the place where the AI is held, but also potentially against civilians and various non-AI assets, for example, taking out the various power plants to prevent these data centers from having enough electricity, etc. Trying to prevent this is very, very difficult. And so here they sort of outline the MAD, mutually assured destruction, versus this new MAME. And so here we have like the U.S. nuclear aggression, Soviet nuclear aggression, right? As long as both are kept low, each can sort of develop nuclear weapons. Because of this, there's mutually assured destruction. If, the bombs start flying, basically everybody's gone, everybody dies. So this creates a stable environment where no one wants to take the risk to take the first shot. Right. Whereas if, let's say, U.S., conducts the first strike, right, that creates the unstable situation leading to mutual destruction. Or if, the Soviet Union does the first strike, again, same thing, it leads to mutual destruction. The MAME works much the same, right? So as long as both U.S. and China are developing sort of at a stable rate, everything is stable as long as they're sort of equal. If U.S. pulls ahead in developing powerful AI, the rivals sabotage, pulls it back. And the same thing with Chinese, right? So if China begins developing powerful AI, U.S. sabotage kind of pulls everything back into this idea of MAME, mutually assured AI malfunction. So they're saying that this MAME, that's the sort of default state, right? Any state can expect its AI projects to be disabled if any rival believes it poses an unacceptable risk. And the effect of this is that there might be a stalemate that postpones the emergence of superintelligence, curtails many loss of control scenarios, and undercuts effort to secure a strategic monopoly. And they continue by talking how to maintain this sort of equilibrium, how to maintain this MAME regime. So the idea is all countries sort of understand the game and how it's played. For example, if one nation pulls ahead and sort of the rivals do some maiming act, such as a cyber attack, this cannot be misread and cause needless escalation, right? So if U.S. pulls ahead in its development of superintelligence, China finds a way to sabotage that data center somehow. U.S. can't escalate and, invade or start a war with China. We have to let these maiming acts, as they say, continue to create that kind of state of equilibrium, improving the ability to do cyber attacks instead of actual warfare, like kinetic attacks, building various data centers in remote locations to not put civilians in danger, to not put cities in danger, and distinguishing between destabilizing AI projects and acceptable use. Right, so something like AlphaFold, the protein folding AI, if it's researching some sort of a scientific project that's going to help people's health, etc., There should be some agreement that that's acceptable use versus something that's developing a bioweapon, for example, or pushing forward towards something above the threshold of what's deemed to be too close to superintelligence, etc. And this approach of mutual observation echoes the spirit of the Open Skies Treaty, which employed unarmed overflights to demonstrate that neither side was hiding missile deployments. And this, in combination with AI-assisted inspections, right? So using AI to do inspections that would report back, without leaking any data or revealing any sort of classified materials, sort of just, does this do anything to exceed the thresholds that we agree on? Yes or no? And they're saying this is speculative that this technology, we could do something like this. It's speculative, but it's increasingly plausible. They continue saying that competitiveness is still going to be extremely important. They point out that multiple assessments now place the probability of a Chinese invasion or blockade in the double digits within a decade. They're talking about the Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Taiwan is the biggest producer of AI chips for the entire world. A blockade or an invasion would instantly deprive the West of AI chips, eliminating its primary edge in AI. China would be more insulated from a AI chip shortage as they've been investing a lot into domestic chip manufacturing. Also on the battlefield, China's lead in drone technologies would pose a second challenge, introducing a cheap and agile weapon system for which the Western forces are not fully prepared. More than a second because it is seen as a crucial weak point. And as they say here, these events could potentially vault China ahead economically and militarily and become a unipolar force. They would become an economic and military superpower as the United States would be severely hampered and not able to compete on those fronts. This would make China the sole superpower, a unipolar force, as they say. This is why AI chips are sort of the currency of economic power right now. And this is kind of actually pretty deep, and maybe it deserves a whole separate sort of video, because historically, wealth and population size underpinned a state's influence. So the power of any given nation would be the wealth, production capabilities, etc., military power, and population size. You need workers to make sure the machinery is running, to supply soldiers, to supply researchers, etc. Now, however, the automation of tasks through AI kind of changes this. A collection of highly capable AI agents operating tirelessly and efficiently rivals a skilled workforce, effectively turning capital into labor. And the entire thing sort of depends on, how capable these AI systems are and the number of AI chips on which they operate. Nations with greater access to AI chips could outcompete others economically. And that's why an invasion of Taiwan might be very tempting for China because it would potentially cripple Western AI capabilities. They suggest creating a secure AI chip supply chain. Some of this is happening as we speak. There have been more and more announcements of building out these fabs in Arizona, I think is one of the sort of main destinations, but more and more trying to bring them to be manufactured here in the United States, or at least away from Taiwan. Next, we talk about military strength, carefully weaving AI into command and control, integrating AI into cyber offense. One of the most important things is to secure drone supply chains. Currently, we are very reliant on Chinese manufacturing of drones. This is also a point that Elon Musk brought up about a month ago, talking to the people of West Point, the U.S. military academy. He had an interview there. About 4 or 5 minutes in, he's talking about how basically the next sort of frontier of military, how fights will be determined, will be largely reliant on who has the best sort of drone supply. And you can think of it as sort of having two KPIs, two metrics. One is how many drones you're able to produce, and two, sort of like the kill ratio of those drones. So if one of your drones takes out two of the enemy drones on average, right, that gives you an advantage. So between those two numbers, that's what will determine largely how successful militaries will be in the future. And when asked specifically if the United States is capable of catching up or capable to kind of like ramping up production, he's saying that it will be a challenge, as in it's not going to be easy. We are sort of not prepared. And they're talking about diffusing AI into command and control and cyber offense. So basically use AI to assist in commanding decisions, in cyber attacks, hacking our opponents, competitors, etc. They do talk about the risks of reducing the human in the loop. Specifically here, they're saying that, for some of the lower level decisions, maybe human approval for individual low-key sort of engagement, lower level engagement may not be as important as specifically that we need human approval for more severe or escalatory attacks. right? There must be a human oversight of key military decisions, which reduces the risk of a flash war similar to the 2010 flash crash, where a minor AI mistake might spiral into destructive reprisals before any human can intervene. If I recall correctly, that's literally the plot of Terminator, of Skynet. Next, they talk about, aside from what we've discussed before, how to not have this fall into the hands of rogue actors. Saying that in the past, states that, we're fighting on every front, still we're careful not to let certain weapons fall into the hands of rogue actors. If rogue actors can, cyber attack critical infrastructure of the states, or unleash various pandemics, etc., then no state remains secure. And for this, we need to have compute security. So again, securing the high-end AI chips, expert controls, so similar to what we have now, perhaps a little bit more robust. The goal is for officials to be able to track these chips without stalling regular kind of commerce and trade. Then they mention enforcement. They give an example here. A facility in Singapore, for example, might initially acquire AI chips under a valid license, only to reroute them illegally to China. I think a lot of people are saying this has happened, so this isn't necessarily a theoretical scenario. By the way, one of the authors on the paper, Alexander Wang, he was the one, if you recall, that said that DeepSeek has over 50,000 H100 NVIDIA chips, which they can't talk about. Now, we've heard some conflicting sort of stories about that. It may or may not be true. Certainly, the founder of DeepSeek specifically has said that in the past, the thing that really sort of hampered their ability to develop these models, it wasn't research capabilities, it wasn't access to talent, it wasn't access to funding. Their biggest sort of stumbling block was access to high-end AI chips. So right now, as far as I can tell from reading a lot of people's opinions that are kind of working in the field that know about this stuff, it seems like while these export controls aren't 100% foolproof, they do seem to be effective. So here, for example, this is Dario Amodei on DeepSeek and export controls. So he's saying that these well-enforced export controls are the only thing that can prevent China from getting millions of chips. He also believes that DeepSeek does not show that China can always obtain the chips it needs via smuggling, or that the controls always have loopholes. So it does seem that their advances are fully export control compliant. So no laws or regulations have been broken there. And of course, informational security. If the weights of a, catastrophically capable model are leaked, they are irreversibly proliferated, meaning that it can be just copied from computer to computer, similar to a file. So one such leak could have a permanent sort of impact. Those models could be distilled, quantized, so people would be able to create sort of their own versions of those models. So here's where sort of information security is very, very important. And next, of course, AI security. So there's a lot of sort of dual use domains, right? Chemistry, biology, etc. can be used for good things like medicine and bad things like the production of lethal pathogens, for example. By fortifying those three things, compute, information, and AI security, we can prevent AI from becoming instruments of terror. And in conclusion, they kind of break down the different viewpoints that various people have on this thing. They have the doomer outlook, convinced that everything's going to be bad, and this is sort of that catastrophe is kind of a foregone conclusion. Others have defaulted to an ostrich stance, basically not thinking about it and not really taking a hard look at it. But here and now, AI demands a sober attention and a risk-conscious approach. And then they summarize kind of the things that we've talked about. MAME, right? So the deterrence of states working against any one state that tries to, race to superintelligence, relying hopefully first and foremost on cyber attacks and sabotage instead of, more sort of direct kinetic strikes, as they've said, sort of military interventions, non-proliferation, and they also talk about the good. As AI diffuses across countless sectors, societies can raise living standards and individuals can improve their well-being however they see fit. Meanwhile, leaders enriched by AI's economic dividends see even more to gain from economic interdependence. Any spirit of détente could take root. Détente is like a loosening of strained relations. And they're saying that during this period of, economic growth due to AI and détente, a slow, multilaterally supervised project to build superintelligence, marked by low risk tolerance and negotiated benefit sharing, could proceed and further increase human well-being. By methodically constraining the most destabilizing moves, states can guide AI towards unprecedented benefits rather than risk it becoming a catalyst of ruin. By the way, they have a much beefier expert version here that I'll link down below if you wanted to read the sort of much bigger and much more complicated version that goes into far greater detail. But I'm curious what you think about this last part here. To me, this really kind of stands out as an interesting take. So in a nutshell, the proposition, as I'm understanding it, is that through this idea of MAME, right? So there's sort of a deterrence from either nation becoming too powerful, right? Too quickly trying to monopolize superintelligence, sort of a race to get there first. So you could almost think of it as a speed limit of sorts, right? So they're not proposing to pause AI development, since that would be, I think some would say, unlikely to succeed. It would be difficult, certainly. They're saying, let's keep developing, but let's kind of pump the brakes and have some sort of a speed limit. If one nation pulls too far ahead, then the other nation is well within its rights to maybe, let some air out of the other nation's tires to slow them down a little bit. And that shouldn't be taken as a sign of a war, right? That shouldn't escalate military conflict. It should be seen as kind of this, it's almost like a game theory. It's like, right, how do we get two different sort of people, two entities that perhaps don't trust each other, that are in competition, but also they do have a shared goal in the sense of no one wants to have some catastrophic scenario that just wipes everybody out. On that, we can all agree. So how do we work together without necessarily having to 100% trust each other? This potentially is a way forward where we're able to slow down the development and hopefully allow this thing to, grow, as they say, provide economic dividends, right? So increase our economic capacity, maybe increase our scientific progress. And hopefully, if this is a kind of a stable equilibrium, then maybe they have this spirit of détente, right? So this idea that maybe some of these tensions will get a little bit relaxed. At the end of the day, nobody really wants a war necessarily. So if it seems like there's some sort of a stable peace, or at least some equilibrium of this sort of MAME deterrence, then maybe, it will kind of allow everybody to relax a little bit while we're still collecting the dividends of AI progress, at which point it would be easier for all the nations to cooperate, right, to reduce the risk, to focus a little bit more on safety, negotiate benefit sharing, right, some sort of a cooperation. Certainly the idea makes sense. It is appealing. If it works the way it's described here, certainly makes sense that something like this could work very well to allow us to continue our progress without triggering that sort of a race condition where both nations try to race forward at all costs, potentially using military force to occupy, places of interest, places that are important to AI production. By the way, for what it's worth, on the other side of this, we have Chinese researchers that are also kind of, through the papers that they published, are kind of signaling the same thing. Here, for example, is a paper we covered not that long ago. Frontier AI systems have surpassed the self-replicating red line. So this is out of the School of Computer Science, Fudan University, Shanghai, China. It shows that even smaller open source models are capable of doing kind of a long horizon planning to replicate themselves across multiple servers or multiple computers, including doing sort of shutdown avoidance, right? So where if the human sends a signal to shut that system down, there's a signal catcher that kind of like is listening for that event and quickly self-replicates on a different system, right? So the original does get killed. So as far as this human is concerned, it does see, okay, like I've shut it down, it is shut down, check, right? But there's another version that sort of appears here in the sort of split second before it gets shut down, aka shutdown avoidance, and quite stealthily too. And they've also demonstrated chain of replication where, AI system A can replicate to AI system B, and then B can replicate to C, etc. And when they're sort of presenting this, they do talk about what needs to kind of happen for us to avoid issues with this. Here they're saying, we hope our findings can serve as a timely alert for the human society to put more efforts on understanding and evaluating the potential risks of frontier AI systems and form international synergy to work out effective safety guardrails as early as possible. And here towards the end, again, they're saying urgent need of international collaboration on AI governance. Because again, a self-replicating AI could do a lot of damage, especially in the hands of a rogue actor. This paper compares it to kind of being like a classic computer virus, but far more intelligent. They also cite Max Tegmark and his work in Life 3.0. They're saying, as plotted by Max Tegmark, the rogue AIs may form AI populations and collude with each other against the human society. His name also appears here in the acknowledgments of the Superintelligence Strategy paper we just read. So again, we have a lot of different people at a lot of different companies, both in the United States and it's seemingly in China as well, and some of the researchers in China, talking about maybe not the same thing, but they're all saying that something's coming and we need to start thinking about how we're going to deal with it, how we're going to have some sort of an international cooperation. Eliezer Yudkowsky recently was in an interview talking about also kind of the need for international cooperation. Now, he's a little bit more aggressively towards trying to pause the whole thing or stop the whole thing in its tracks. And I got to applaud him for being very sort of honest and explaining his views very openly. Him saying that we should pause AI development would not be honest, because pausing sort of means that we'll resume it at some point. Dario Amodei has done an interview with the Hard Fork a week or two ago talking about some of this stuff. So his big concern is kind of an autocracy, kind of a very tyrannical rule. So he believes that democratic nations should lead in the development of AI. And he's saying sort of his concern is that the autocratic countries don't get ahead of us from a military perspective, right? So this is not about denying them the benefits of the technology, and those benefits would be absolutely enormous. Now, the sort of big criticism that it seems like he's receiving is that people are saying it seems like he's calling for this sort of race condition to powerful A.G.I for China and U.S., for the U.S. to basically just race ahead to try to get there. And the worries, of course, that maybe there's some corners that might get cut along the way, some sort of AI safety guardrails that don't get put in place so we can get there faster. And so, again, he makes the point that sort of in a democratic country, right, we have rule of law. We can make certain safety commitments and the government can enforce those. On an international stage, there's not really a way to enforce those agreements necessarily. There's not a judge or referee that can make people comply. So his take is that in order for us to have any authority to enforce any agreement between the U.S. and China, and I encourage everybody to listen to this interview, but this transcript makes it a little bit distorted, I feel like, but he's saying that he believes if U.S. is a couple of years ahead of China, we can use those couple of years to make things safe. We can figure out how to do the guardrails, etc. So the idea is, if I understand correctly, if I'm interpreting correctly, is to kind of, yes, race ahead, gain an advantage, also do the export controls with the hope that if we have a little bit of a lead, we will be able to do more for setting guardrails, doing more AI safety research, and potentially even maybe having some influence over China to not produce anything that would be scary from a military perspective. And just within the last 24 hours, Anthropic posted this in response to the White House request for information on an AI action plan. They've submitted these recommendations to the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Here they mention Dario Amodei's Machines of Loving Grace, a blog post he wrote. We covered that on this channel. I'll link it down below. A phenomenal read that mentions, amongst other things, the potentially seeing people that are alive today that kind of hit that escape velocity for not dying, right? To basically where our research into sort of staying healthier and the average life expectancy going up faster than the rate at which you're aging. So we could potentially see some people that are alive today, maybe a child that's alive today that's never going to sort of descend into senescence and stay kind of, and instead maybe just like stay at a certain sort of biological age for a long time potentially. And also they're talking that by the late 2026 or early 2027, we're going to see these AIs develop intellectual capabilities matching or exceeding that of Nobel Prize winners across most disciplines. They will be able to autonomously reason through complex tasks and, of course, be able to interface with the physical world, aka robots. And again, they're hammering some of the same points that we've just read: national security testing of the capabilities of AI, both domestic and foreign, strengthening the export controls, right? This is what Dario Amodei has been sort of in favor of. Enhancing lab security. Again, we don't want these leaks out of these AI labs, right? If they're developing superintelligence, they better be pretty leak-proof and espionage-proof. Of course, a lot more energy, government AI adoption, and preparing for economic impacts. They're talking about preparing for potential large-scale changes to the economy. AKA, we're going to have some proportion of the workforce being displaced, being made, redundant or obsolete or not needed, however you want to phrase that. We've talked about, for example, OpenAI potentially releasing a $20,000 a month agent in 2025 in this year that's capable of doing PhD level work, a $10,000 a month agent capable of doing software engineering, and a $2,000 a month agent that would be like a highly paid knowledge worker. I am almost done watching this latest thing from the Ezra Klein show. Also, this article, The Government Knows A.G.I is Coming, is kind of goes along with that interview, kind of hand in hand. In the interview, he interviews Ben Buchanan, who is the White House Special Advisor for AI. So he's actually a former advisor. He worked with the Biden White House, right? And this guy is not working for an AI lab. So he is not here to sort of hype things up. And the thing that they're getting out of this sort of interview, and this is not just this one person, this is becoming, as you can see, more and more apparent, as we're here saying, I think we are on the cusp of an era in human history that is unlike any of the eras we have experienced before. And we're not prepared, in part because it's not clear what it would mean to prepare, which I think is very well put. We can see some of the potential dangers and bumps that we're going to see ahead of us, maybe some of them, but how do you prepare for them? There are really no clear answers on that. And just like Dario, Amodei, Ben is very concerned about potentially a kind of a tyrannical government establishing control, potentially never being able to be overthrown, right? This little thing that I like during the interview. He says there's a saying in both Russian and Chinese: heaven is high and the emperor is far away, meaning that even under those sort of regimes, right, there was some kind of a space where the state couldn't intrude. It couldn't always be watching. Dario Amodei gives the example that, for example, a lot of these states were limited by what the enforcers of the state were willing to do. So there was always sort of a limit to how far people would go. The fear is, of course, that AI changes it, right? That book in 1984 where everybody was watched and at the end you discover that nobody's actually watching any of the cameras. Well, 1984 could exist, but with every camera being watched 24 hours a day with unwavering, attention to detail by some of these AI systems, cold-blooded enforcement that will obey any rule, right, that the state chooses to carry out. And so that's why he's saying that we could agree quickly here that this makes very tangible something that is probably core to the aspiration of their society. So he's talking about China, of a level of control that only an AI system could help bring about. I just find that terrifying. So perfect surveillance, right? So perfect sort of police force, of robots and drones and whatnot. And now some of these recent studies that are coming out is we're almost not quite at the mind reading level yet, but AI systems could learn to predict certain brain patterns in human brains to try to kind of predict some of the outputs. You might have seen some of the studies where they put a little chip inside of a rat or a cockroach, I think it was, and then they're able to sort of use a remote control to like pilot that thing around, like you push forward and the thing starts running forward. So in the wrong hands, something like this is terrifying. That's the word that he uses, terrifying, and I don't think he uses it lightly. And I'm not talking about specifically China or US or any other country. I'm saying that just the idea of this technology that's kind of coming online now, being used to enforce an autocracy like this, is scary. That's something that we have to be very, very aware of. And then, of course, we have the military applications. We have the potential for this to fall into some rogue nation's state that's using it for terror. There's a potential loss of control scenario as well. And with all of that, there's an almost unimaginable potential prosperity and progress and just wonderfulness that can also come about as a result of it. So one thing that we know for sure, I think, from all of this is that we're living potentially in the most important time of our history, kind of like as we're seeing this technology roll out. Trying to predict where we're going to be in 50 years, I feel like is almost nearly impossible. If we get it right, it can be unimaginably good. If we get it wrong, it can be unimaginably bad. It's hard for me to see a scenario where not too many things change. I guess that's a possibility. I just don't see how. But the point is, what do you think about this proposal? So Eric Schmidt, Dan Hendricks, Alexander Wang, this idea of MAME, deterrence, so that no one nation sort of is able to just sprint ahead to superintelligence, but a sort of like an equilibrium where we sort of advance and focus on acceptable tasks, things that provide sort of benefits to the people. And hopefully, if we're able to kind of like hold that, then it would allow for some of these tensions to de-escalate, for more sort of international cooperation to form. So instead of conflict and competition and tension and potentially military actions, we would be able to kind of be a little bit more aligned. Do you think that plan could work? Maybe you want a full sort of pause, a stop to the progress, or perhaps you want just everybody to kind of race ahead and see what happens. Or maybe you're more in line with the sort of the accelerationists, right? So just kind of a full steam ahead. We got to get there first. Where do you fall in with all of this? What do you think is the right approach? If you had to bet, what would you bet as the right path forward? Keep in mind, this is for all of the marbles. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. My name is Wes Roth, and I'll see you next time.